So we're really fortunate tonight, just in this intimate setting, to be able to share some time with Dr. Byron Johnson. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a busy time, and so I really appreciate you taking time and being here. And for Byron, who's been, crossing the globe here the last several days, just got in from London, Texas here. His wife's wondering where he is, not quite sure when you're going to be home. But we're certainly fortunate to have him here tonight. So let me just take about 60 seconds, share a little bit of information with you about Dr. Johnson. Byron is a senior fellow and one of the original founders of the Religious Freedom Institute. So when Tom Farr, whom many of you know, speaks of the four geezers or whatever affectionate phrase he uses, Byron is one of those founders. He is currently Distinguished Professor of the Social Sciences at Baylor University, and he's founding director of the Baylor Institute for Studies of Religion, known as the ISR at Baylor, and director of the program on pro-social behavior. Byron is a leading authority on the scientific study of religion, the efficacy of faith-based organizations, and criminal justice, and will benefit from that world-class expertise this evening. His most recent publications have examined the impact of faith-based programs on recidivism, reduction, and prisoner reentry. There are books sprinkled around the office by Dr. Johnson. He has authored over 200 articles and books. So I'm wondering how you had time to travel here tonight. I'm sure he was writing on the way. But we are the beneficiaries of that prolific expertise, and we're blessed tonight to have him with us. Thank you for being here.
Hey, a real quick story. So I'm flying back from London, and I'm working on the computer, and there's this little outlet where you can plug in your laptop. So everybody's sleeping, but I'm working like a maniac. And the outlet won't work. And so it says 110, and I was so glad to see 110, After you've been in London for a long time, you can, 110, please. So I called the stewardess over. I said, I can't get this thing to work. And she said, she's trying it won't work. And she says, well, look, there's a really nice lady right over there. Do you think we can plug it in over there? And I go, I think she's so nice. It's my wife. Yes, I think that. And so she said, oh, I didn't know. Anyway, so we plug it in. It doesn't work. Well, then I said, don't worry about it. It's okay. So I put the laptop up. And she comes back, and she had put 10,000 miles on my account. And I'm thinking, wow, this is, a good experience on an airline. Can you imagine? Because the outlet didn't work. And I should have said, well, the TV screen, it's not working really either. I can't watch anything. Can I get 5,000 for that? But anyways, it's always good to be back here. I love this place. And even though I had a hand in getting the RFI started, I was just telling David that this is my first time to be here physically, because we do Zoom calls every week. So I've been seeing everything from over there. And so it looks a little bit different in person. And I even did the Google thing on the outside, so I could see it, as if I was here. But it's good to be here. Even though I come to Washington a lot, sometimes it's just hard because the trips, everything's scheduled. And so it's great to be here and share with you all. I'm really thrilled at how the RFI is doing. Hi, Abby. So good to see you as well. And I saw Caroline earlier. And this is my friend Christos, who lives and works here in Washington. He's been at the White House, and he's thinking about going to the State Department, but he may be going to work with the Vice President. So we'll see. He's an economist, and we're hatching all kinds of research projects to do together. So tonight, I want to talk a little bit about something that I do know quite a bit about. I've spent 30 years hanging around prisons. My middle name is 5 to 10. So the most recent research we've been doing focuses on what I want to talk about tonight. But I wanted to start this off by saying there's actually now a good bit of research on this topic. Now, when I started doing this research back in the Paleolithic era, there was nothing. So I remember telling my major professor I wanted to study the impact of religion on crime. And he goes, "What? Why would you want to do that? That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you want to look at something more traditional?" And I made the argument that, since no one's done anything, wouldn't it make sense that I tried to carve out a niche? And he said, that kind of makes sense. Well, fast forward 30 years, and now there's a ton of research linking these two important variables. And these are just some of the studies, not all of them that I have done, but a good bit of them I have. And just showing the relationship between religion and crime reduction. And but it's not just crime, it's delinquency. So in any of the samples that we've studied, adults, kids, whether it's alcohol or drugs, we've even done several studies on domestic violence. There seems to be this relationship. And when I say religion, you're saying, well, how are you defining religion? And in most of the studies, it's church attendance. We have other measures that we use as well. People define themselves as religious. I think I'm religious. I believe in God. I pray a lot, etc. But the one that seems to stand alone is how often you actually participate. And so church attendance there's something powerful about church attendance. And the other big thing that comes from studies like this, and there are many more, is that it's protective. So it protects you from suicide. It protects you from using drugs and alcohol in the first place. And so some of the studies, we looked at high-risk groups. So if you were to ask me who's a high-risk group, young black males are at elevated levels of risk for being involved in crime and delinquency. Another risk category would be kids who have both parents locked up. That's a high-risk group, right? Unless you go to church. And we've done those studies looking at kids that are raised in housing projects. And you compare those kids that actually are affiliated with churches and regularly attend and those that don't. And it's a big factor in keeping them out of trouble in the first place. So it protects you from those kinds of things, but it also does more. And so when David mentioned the pro-social thing I started at Baylor, I wanted, instead of predicting the likelihood that you're going to do something bad, I wanted to look at the other side of the coin. Why is it that so many people are actually law-abiding? I mean, we forget the fact that most people don't break the law. It's just a small little group, and we spend all of our time on that. But why is it that most people are law-abiding? And not only that, why is it that so many people do honorable things? Why do people stop to help someone in need? Why are people so generous? Did you know how much Americans give away in generosity in money each year? Well, let's put it this way. Over $1 billion a day. That's how much we give. So this last year, over $400 billion was given to charity, and most of it given to religious organizations. That's a lot of generosity. That's pro-social. Who does the lion's share of volunteerism in this country? People of faith. The list goes on and on and on. So pro-social behavior is another way of studying something. Instead of studying why do people break the law, I want to know why people who did break the law stay out of trouble now. What helped them turn their lives around? And what helps to keep someone sober? Now, I used that slide initially, and now this is a test. I'm using it again. Who's the person in the picture? Yes, that's a young Chuck Colson. And most of you, the only reason why you would even know that is because you've read something about it, because you certainly weren't around. This is the former Watergate figure in the Nixon administration, who actually was convicted and served time in federal prison and came to faith. And when he got out of prison, he started something called Prison Fellowship. And I've had the privilege of doing most of the research for Prison Fellowship now for the last 25 years. But that's who that is. It's Chuck Colson. And I've done a lot of studies for them, and this is one of the studies I did for them is at the top up there, where I looked at their Bible study program. They actually had several programs that they do in prisons, but one of them was particularly impactful, and it was just weekly volunteer-led Bible studies that inmates would do 1 hour a week. And so I tracked people that participated in Bible studies, and then a matched group of offenders that looked just like those offenders, quasi-experimental design, who didn't get this intervention to see what would happen. And we followed them when they got out of prison for 1 year. And there was a significant difference. If you participated in Bible studies, you were a lot less likely to be rearrested. And it was published in Justice Quarterly. And so Prison Fellowship was thrilled with that. They weren't thrilled with the other findings, by the way. The other findings were that their other programs didn't do anything. And so they were very, very discouraged about that. And I said, well, one way of looking at it is maybe you should put all your eggs in the Bible study basket and quit doing these other things, since they don't seem to work very well. They didn't listen to me on that one. But they did listen to the overall findings. And the overall findings say as little as 1 hour a week of a Bible study actually seemed to help people stay out of jail. Come on, that's a really modest intervention, isn't it? So then they decided, what if we were to expand that, and they used this language, not me, do 24/7. You know, and I'm thinking that would be cruel and unusual punishment, you know? It's a violation of, someone's constitutional rights. But they launched a faith-based prison in Sugar Land, which is right outside of Houston, and they called this thing the Interchange Freedom Initiative. I don't know who comes up with these titles. IFI. They've since changed it. And they asked me to do the study. So I did do a study of this. I tracked people through the program, another quasi-experimental design, control group, experimental group. And the program was 2 years. You have to go through the program. It takes about 2 years to complete it. And then once you complete the program, you're released. So they took people at the end of their prison sentence, which is actually a very smart idea. So you finish this, and then you leave. And then I followed them for 2 years post-release, which is a really good kind of a recidivism study. That was the problem with the first one up there. It was only 1 year post-release. You could say, well, they were clean for 12 months, but then what happens? And we'll come back to that in a second. So I studied this faith-based prison, and the findings were remarkable. It really did have an enormous effect on arrest and reconviction. And then we released this study at the White House. These two guys that you see closest here on the left are prisoners, and then there's the president. We released it at the White House. And then on the far side, next to the woman is a white guy. He's also a prisoner that I studied in the program. And so for prisoners to wind up meeting the president was pretty special. And the president had a close bond with this guy on the left because he loved his suit. And I think he was being kind. He's like, I love that suit. And that guy said, and so the president, when he came to the prison to visit it, the inmates formed a choir. And they serenaded the president. And they sang Amazing Grace. And he couldn't stand it. He got in the choir. He had to. He couldn't help himself. It was completely non-scripted. And he puts his arms around these two guys, one of the guys being this guy, George, who was convicted of murder. And the headline in the Houston Chronicle, President Hugs Murderer. That was the headline in the Houston Chronicle. It's really interesting how things play out in the press. But so the president is seeing George for the second time, and George told me outside the White House, if the president comes up to me, I'm going to kiss him. I go, George, please. He kissed him. He really did. I've never told that. I just thought of it, but he did. He kissed him right on the cheek, thankfully. At any rate, that one study that I did where I found that the guys were less likely to be rearrested after a year, I went back and revisited that study to track them 3 years out, and we found the effects. It helped them stay out of prison over a 3-year period. And in the criminology literature, if you can stay out of prison for 3 years, you've pretty much licked it. Most people come back within the first year, but there's still others. And then this is a book that I wrote. I saw someone was crazy enough. If you suffer from insomnia, do pick up a copy. But here I just tried to capture about 25 years worth of research in one place, and that's the book More God, Less Crime. Whoops. And this is all just setting up what I'm going to really talk about, and I need to go fast. The top article there, Christos would really like it, although I'm afraid for him to see it because I did a cost-benefit analysis, and I'm sure he would say, this is so primitive. But we looked at prisoners that participated in that same prison study I did in Texas. They did it in Minnesota. And they learned all the lessons. Everything that they did wrong in Texas, they kind of fixed. So when we did the study in Minnesota, the effects were even more compelling. And then we did a cost-benefit analysis, looking at things like not only, working and staying out of jail, but do they pay child support? Other kinds of things that you could look at. And we find that the participation in this saved $8,300 per person that enrolled in the program. So for some people, you want to hear the dollars and cents. Do these programs work? Well, how much money do they save us? So that was what we did there. And then the bottom study is called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program. This is one of the most innovative programs I've ever seen, where they take inmates and help them create their own companies. How do you like that? So instead of thinking, can we get them a job sweeping, because that's all they've been doing in prison, or flipping hamburgers at McDonald's, how about business executives coming into prisons, finding entrepreneurial inmates, helping them to develop a business plan, which, by the way, is graded by students in business schools in the Ivy Leagues and other places like Baylor. They actually score these business plans. And so the recidivism rate for guys that go through this program is like, I think, 3%. And so, and the unemployment rate, there's like zero unemployment. So it's kind of a joke, but you have a better job of being employed if you go to prison and go through this than someone else that doesn't go to prison. It's amazing. And I think this is the kind of thing that I want us to get to in a minute when you talk about reform. What would reform look like? It's a complete paradigm shift. How can you imagine helping inmates not just to be able to train to do something, but maybe literally to create their own job and for the first time have a real stake in conventional society? These are just some studies that we've done in what we're now calling positive criminology. It goes back to the pro-social thing, and we kind of stole this from the positive psychology movement. And so we have what we call positive criminology. And so we're publishing a lot of things in there, in journals that look at different studies that we've been doing and kind of creating a whole new literature on positive criminology. These are just publications that we've been writing. These are really exciting. These are publications on drug addicts. So we got a major grant from Templeton to study teenagers and young adults, people like between the ages of 16 and 23 they go before the court, and the court adjudicates them, and they have options, and one of the options is to go into a faith-based 12-step program. And so we studied them and followed them over time. And so these are all publications that just comes from that one research project. And I can tell you in a nutshell what we found. So you've heard of people that have this dramatic conversion. They were an alcoholic one day and they're clean the next. That's not what we found. We found that conversion in and of itself doesn't really help. a lot. It may have eternal consequences, I'm not saying that, but they still relapse. The real magic is when people find God and serve other people, serve other addicts. By doing so, it combats the narcissism and isolation that comes with addiction. These are the killers in our society. You know, one of the reasons why we have opioid crisis is because people isolate themselves from others. They do exactly the wrong thing. And so how can you isolate yourself if you're actually in a group environment where you're told to help your neighbor? So it's kind of a biblical thing. Love God, love your neighbor, and guess what? You didn't even know it, but you've changed. And that's what we found. That's the key to sobriety, is the service component. It's one thing to find God, but if you don't give your life away, the effects are kind of minimal. This is the Louisiana State Penitentiary, known as Angola. For some of you, you won't be familiar with it. You've probably heard of places like San Quentin or Alcatraz. Well, typically this one is known as the bloodiest prison in America, maybe the most corrupt prison in America, one of the most violent prisons in America. All the guys here, basically, almost all of them, serving life with no parole. Louisiana is not a place where you want to commit a crime. So we interviewed many people there in their 70s and 80s that had been in prison for 50, 60 years. One guy was in prison for purse snatching. It just so happens it was his third felony. And so he got life. And in Louisiana, of course, that means you will die in prison. There is no parole. And so this particular warden, that's how it looks. It's huge. It's 6,300 acres. And they have over 6,000 prisoners. If you know anything about prisons, that's kind of ridiculous because the more secure the prison, the smaller. So typically a high security prison would only have like 1,000 inmates and a lot of correctional officers per inmate. And then as the security goes down, the numbers go up. So this is the largest maximum security prison in the United States. This is just what a cell looks like. And this is the warden that went there in 1995 to inherit. This is not a destination job. Where are you going? I'm going to be the warden at Angola, the most crooked place where you can't trust anybody, including the staff. And so he had this weird idea of starting a seminary in the prison. And he claims his mother gave him the idea, and I'm sure that probably happened. And so they started a Bible college. They got funding to build it. And lo and behold, they started training people. And they partnered with the New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary to provide professors that would come there and teach. I mean, this is a rigorous program. So I had a team of 5 people. The study took us 5 years to complete. So I cannot tell you how much time our team has spent on the grounds in that prison, literally months on end, all day and night, just hanging out, going to church with these guys. This is just one of the signs. There are many signs, but you can see this passage here. It's Philippians 3:13. And someone wanted to file a lawsuit that the state had a sign up with a paraphrase of a scripture. So they just whited it out and they dropped the suit. So that was okay. Didn't have to change the wording at all. This is just a typical class in the prison Bible college. So there you see the guys studying. This is the inmate library. Here's another class going on. This is a pastor. This guy right here leads one of the 29 congregations in the prison. So he's gone to seminary, he has his degree, he's a pastor, and his congregation will have an entire staff, as well as like worship teams, deacons, and then ministries, all kinds of ministries within each of these congregations, each of these 29 congregations. So we got a grant to study the Bible college. But what we wound up doing was studying the Bible college and these churches because we had thought this is bizarre. I've never heard of a prison that has churches. And you know why? There are none. This is the only place in the country where they have churches. And when I say churches, I'll actually show you in a second. I want you to see this, though. If you're a minister, like this guy is, Ron Hicks, you get a special ID that allows you to go anywhere in the prison. You know, and if a correctional officer were to try to stop this guy, they would get in trouble. So it's a pretty nice credential to have. This is the cemetery because, as I said, they all die there, about 3 a month. This is the coffins that they build. They cost $217. They're made of plywood. The inside, the lining of the casket is made from comforters purchased at Walmart. And the Graham family has been going there and doing work for years. So when you saw Billy Graham when he died, if any of you remember that, his body in the rotunda was in one of these caskets. So Billy and Ruth Graham were buried in a $217 plywood casket from Angola. And when I wrote an op-ed about it, and I got all these calls, I want to be buried in one of those things, you know, can I be buried in one of those? And the rule is it's only for prisoners, except for George Beverly Shea, who some of you might know sang for Billy, and he would perform here at the prison. And so those are the only 3 exceptions. This is the hospice unit for all the inmates that are dying. So these are inmates taking care of other inmates. The idea, again, give your life away. The guy in the middle there is an instructor, and he has what they call SAT certification. So they have like transmission, air conditioning, different kinds of certifications. He has like 32. He too is a convicted murderer, serving life, incredibly articulate, the nicest guy, and you're kind of thinking, like, he's in here for murder? Well, he did something 30 years ago, and but you know, one of the things that we found is, you know, sometimes you can get faked out. Like sometimes David seems like a nice guy, I seem, right? But maybe he's a serial killer. You don't know. But no, what you might find, the next time you see him, he's not so happy. That's why we kept going back, week after week, month after month, year after year. These people are happier than the people I know and associate with. And some people would say they have what is called the joy of the Lord. It's this authentic faith that's so real. How else could you be happy knowing you're never getting out of here? It's not like I'm trying to impress you so I can get an early release. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be in that cemetery. So this is just a door. Took a picture of it because the inmates have their own, the ministers have their own little office. This is just one of the churches. So you can see, when I say they have churches built with private money. This is a Catholic church. This is the most recent church. These are missionaries that are sent out to other prisons from Angola. Once they become ministers, they send them out. And we have a little video that Caroline's going to help me with, I think. I didn't do this video, but someone did a nice job.
Before prison, I never heard the gospel. Not one time.
How the seminary not only taught me more about the Word of God, but it really taught me more about worship and getting to know that I'm worth something in Him.
Warden Kane said in the first meeting, he said to his wardens, associate wardens who were there, he said, "We're going to do this. If you want to do this with us, good. If you don't want to do this with us, then we'll get somebody in your place to do it." And with that kind of support, you know, the guys started paying attention.
Sitting in that cell and realizing you've lost your family, you've lost your confidence, you've lost your ability to say I know best. You can't fool yourself anymore.
After I heard the program was here, it was like, man, I gotta get in there. I gotta get in there because I want to be able to get all the tools and all the skills to help perfect what God got for my life.
Because they have the same transforming experience. They have the same call of God in their lives that we have here. And they're living it out day by day.
There's just so much pain, you know. There's a lot of people, you know, people are in prison because they've committed crimes, but my experience is most of the people in prison have been horribly treated through most of their lives as well. So, you know, you really don't want to fail to take that into consideration, you know, a person's own history and the abuse that they have suffered. And it's not excuse, it's just reality. So you want to help them become well so that they can become healers too.
You know, these inmate ministers have just saturated the prison, and you can see, you know, and it's the church. You know, we keep saying inmate ministers in the Bible college, but it's the church. But what the Bible college has done, with those numbers, you see 29 pastors, you know, they've equipped the church to do God's work and to continue.
This is the one place where I've seen the church being the church in such a way that it's transforming the culture in which it exists. And, I mean, in a lot of places where I've been in ministry, the culture has had more impact on the church than the church has had on the culture. But that's not been true at Angola. And we're beginning to see that at other prisons as well.
Okay, so I'll cut through some of this. You know, we did all kinds of statistical analyses to determine if participation in the Bible college actually helped these guys. And the reality is, you know, people say, well, did it affect the recidivism rate? They're not going anywhere. They're not getting out of prison. They're dying there. But we can look at their behavior there. We can look at rule breaking, you know, what they call prison infractions. Are they getting in trouble? And then what kind of programs are they participating in while they're in prison beside the seminary? And so we did monitor those kinds of things. And essentially what we found is people that go to the Bible college do better than all those that don't. And people who actually affiliate with one of the congregations, they too do better, both in staying out of trouble and doing pro-social kinds of things. Those that do the best are people that went to the Bible college and are embedded in congregations. They're the ones that score the highest. And so we've published this, and you know, we talk about things like redemption narratives. Others have used these terms too. But the big thing that we talk about is identity transformation. And we did surveys with these guys over time and asked a lot of questions, and then we did what we call ethnographic interviews too. Sometimes these interviews would last an hour or two, where we would ask them a series of questions. And so through it all, we were able to publish a number of papers and a book, and this is the name of the book, The Angola Prison Seminary, and where we were able to show, and the warden was such an interesting character. If any of you have ever seen that dreadful show, The Dukes of Hazzard, the warden kind of looks like Boss Hogg and sounds like him too. You can't understand anything he says. And so you think he's a nut, but he's actually quite bright. And I remember him saying, you know, Doc, it's all about, you know, moral rehabilitation. It's moral rehabilitation. And I said, you know, and he wanted to know what we were finding, but we said, we'll tell you what we've got when we're ready to give you the findings. And so when we sat him down and we told him the findings, he goes, that sounds right. Well, he had said the key to every prison is to build a Bible college. That's not what we found. What we found is that the Bible college was really an important factor. The magic was those churches where you train these people and then you unleash them to serve everybody else. And then all the ministries that came out of the congregations are unbelievable. These guys make like 10 cents an hour and they tithe. And then they have benevolence ministries. I'm thinking benevolence ministries, they don't have anything. You know, toothpaste, just whatever. They get a care package from home, they give it away. They do sidewalk counseling. They do grief counseling because their families are dying. And so they need someone to minister to. They have people that do that. I mean, the kinds of things that they're doing, they have suicide watch. And so these guys are on call, these ministers, 24 hours a day for suicide watch. Because suicide happens a lot in prison. And by the way, suicides have gone down to 0. I mean, they just don't happen at Angola anymore. One of the most interesting things for me as a criminologist is to know that anytime you disrupt a system, you can have problems. So this prison had 5,000 prisoners, which is huge. But the governor decided to close another prison in Louisiana to save money. They put on buses like 1,300 prisoners and shipped them all at once to Angola. So I'm thinking, okay, you're going to bring in 1,300 guys overnight into a place that's got over 5,000. So what do you think? Riots, burn the place down? Not one incident. No one's ever written anything about it, but when I heard about it, I'm just thinking, you could imagine how this could be a disaster. And so it is, in fact, a remarkable story, even though the warden gets it wrong. If he were here tonight, he would tell you it's just start a Bible college. And about 20 states have done that, by the way. This is the latest thing, start a Bible college. And people are calling me all the time, we're starting a Bible college, what do you think? I'm thinking it's a mistake. And you know why it's a mistake? Because none of the other states will allow congregations. They just won't do it. Their laws, their rules prohibit it because of a failed trustee system from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where inmates actually guarded other inmates, especially in places like Mississippi. And because there were so many abuses where inmates were killing other inmates, all states passed laws prohibiting an inmate to have authority over another inmate. Never will that happen again. And so to have a pastor and a congregation can't work. It's a security problem. And you're thinking, you've got it all wrong. They don't have any authority over these guys. They do nothing but pour their lives out as a living sacrifice to all these guys, and so do all the other church leaders. So one of the things that I wanted to mention to you when we think about what does this mean for the criminal justice system, I think what it means is we need to think of intentional ways for inmates to be a key part of the solution. I mean, what you saw there was an inmate training inmates how to do air conditioning, transmission repair, refrigeration. I mean, these are all inmate-led programs. Let me just show you this. This is, for any of you that read The Economist, this is a story last year in The Economist, and you've heard of MS-13? Well, this is a prison in El Salvador that has like guys, you know, people think America is so punitive. I heard AOC the other day saying we should get rid of all prisons, you know. This is one of the most ridiculous statements ever made without a shred of evidence behind anything that she's saying. America's the most punitive state in the world. They cram people in here. You have to stand up. You can't even sit down. Okay, this is El Salvador. But guess what's happening? They're all becoming Christians in prison. It's all inmate-led. This is a story, not in Christianity Today, this is in The Economist. And so we've been going back and re-looking at all of our current studies, and then it's making sense. How do addicts stay sober? They stay sober if they find God, and other addicts help other addicts. In Angola, all the stuff is done by prisoners. They're the pastors. You know, it used to be that people would volunteer and come into a prison and preach. I mean, you go to any church that would say that they're an evangelical church, for example, and you would say, how many people in this room have a prison ministry or go into jails? And you'll probably get some hands to go up. You know, they go in, they share with prisoners. It's lovely, it's great. But here in Angola, they don't need that because the inmates themselves are doing the speaking and the leading. And we've been there, we've listened to them. They're fantastic. I mean, they're incredible preachers. And so I actually have a grant proposal in front of Templeton to do a study in El Salvador. My wife is doing some intercessory prayer that I don't get it. She does not want me going down to El Salvador to do that particular study. But it seems to be consistent with what we're now finding, and it does need to be a serious part of our discussions about what would criminal justice reform look like in the first place. Oh, and this is just an article in the New York Times about that story I was just telling you about. The only way to get out of MS-13 is to become a Christian and be authentic. Because if it's a gang, they'll kill you. You know, once you're in a gang and you try to get out, there is no way out except they'll let you out if you become an authentic Christian. You know, they're very moral about these things. This is just our website where virtually everything I've said you can get off of our website and download it for free. And I've gone over, David, sorry about that, but it's let's do some Q&A.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's open it up to any questions.
Did you guys in your studies look at how many of these individuals had experienced or been exposed to faith before, and like their experience being exposed to Christianity, say outside of prison and then within prison?
Yeah. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them had early experiences of going to church. They remember it. It was either a mother or a grandmother that took them. But, you know, 13, 14 years of age, they quit. And so for a lot of them, the Christian message is not foreign to them. It's something that, you know, resonates because they do remember it. And but they were never really serious about their faith. And of course, then, you know, a lot of them, as you might expect, raised in very difficult situations. Yeah, there is that past that's there, especially among African Americans who tend to be more religious than Caucasians, for example. And in this prison, by the way, there was a nice breakdown between whites, blacks, and Latinos. But we found this, we didn't find race to be an issue. This affects them all. Just so many neat things. A lot of these churches that you saw up here were completely different denominations. There's even a group of Muslim inmates here that went through the Bible college and graduated from the Bible college. At least one converted, but the others didn't. They're proudly, you know, Muslim. And you know, you ask them about that, and they go, "Well, you look, 90% of Christianity is good for us. You know, we just reject the Jesus part, but the rest of it is good, and it's good for us." And it's also, I think people see, oh, it's Baptist. It's very ecumenical. It's Christianity, but it's ecumenical, and a lot of the guys there go to multiple congregations. This is the other thing that's interesting. I think that we're the ones that are not too ecumenical. You know, not only do we go to the same church we've always gone to, we sit in the same chair, right? Well, these guys, they go to a Presbyterian church on Monday night, and then on Wednesday night they go to a Baptist church, and then on Friday night they go to a Pentecostal church. I mean, you know, it's just kind of like, who does something like that? But they do. And so I think it might do us good to experiment a little bit like they do there. But again, questions? Yes.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing. The study was fascinating. When looking at the cultural impact of Bible colleges and prisons versus churches, are you relying on a very active church population that doesn't just sit in the pews but then gives, as you're talking about? Are there any studies that compare the active church population in those churches versus those who just purely attend? Is there any positive impact of just attending?
Yes, there is a positive impact of attending, and most of these guys, are not sporadic attenders. In what we call the free world, you have a lot of people that attend infrequently or seldomly, and then you have regular attenders. And of course, what we find is the more often you attend, the better the outcome. But for these guys, we don't have too many guys that come to church on Sundays. And keep in mind, this is a prison of about 6,300, so the vast majority of people in this prison do not go to church. It's 29 congregations, but like some of them, the biggest one has 200 people. That's by far the biggest church in the prison. So most of them have 30 to 80 people in their church. And so, and so when we say it's had a transformative impact on the prison, it has, in that the violence is down dramatically across the board. So even, it doesn't mean there aren't bad things that still go on there. People do break the rules and such. But yeah, I think the attendance thing is a big factor. There are no other studies to even compare ours to, because again, none of the other states will allow it. Not even Texas, which is really a faith-friendly state. And Texas, actually, I didn't tell you this, but we did a study in Texas at the same time because they wanted to model Angola at a prison in Houston called the Darrington Unit. But they would not allow these guys to form congregations. They would send them out as missionaries to other prisons. And so right now that's happening, and I didn't tell you, but we've got about 3 papers published on that too. And so they send them out in threes. So you send out 3 missionaries to a prison with 3,000 inmates, and those 3 missionaries work with the chaplain. And so it's an interesting question. Will they have an effect without having church bodies? Well, what's happening is they're doing underground churches. They're doing Bible studies, cell groups, baptizing people here and there. I mean, they're doing all kinds of things. So kind of doing the work of a congregation without having an official congregation. And so we're finding the effects in Texas actually quite positive. But it's a different thing than having a congregation. I mean, even Bob Putnam from Harvard, who wrote the book Bowling Alone, in his research, he basically says, and we always refer to Bob Putnam as Mr. Social Capital because he says social capital is in decline in America. But through his research now, over the last decade or so, Bob's come to the conclusion that half of all social capital is actually spiritual capital. Literally half. And it's found in America's houses of worship. So that's a pretty compelling finding from Putnam, and I think he's hitting the nail on the head, that these houses of worship matter. And you may hear stuff in the media all the time. I'll come back, David, and do a presentation at some other point about, is religion going away in America? Because if you listen to the Washington Post and a lot of newspapers and the media, you'd think that religion is basically on life support. It's absolutely false. We have many more congregations in America than we thought we had. And so it's just the opposite. Faith is robust in America. It has been for decades. It doesn't mean that we're not struggling with secular side of the coin. Yeah, faith is alive and well. Even among young people, I think a lot of people have written off young people as not religious anymore, and it's not true. That's another talk.
Abby?
Question. Were there any studies done on like any reconciliation between the actively attending inmates and their families outside of the prison?
We don't have data on the families outside the prison, but one of the things that's different, because Louisiana is its own state, right? Okay? The families are allowed to come in and worship in the prison. Yeah. And the staff, the prison staff is too. So you have staff that go to church and their pastor is a prisoner. And so when the warden was telling me this, I'm going like, what? He goes, oh yeah, I go to church. I go to different churches inside the prison. I'm going, okay, this is really weird. And then when you go there and you hear one of these guys preach, you're riveted. you're just riveted. And then you have to go back and hear your own pastor and go, but they used to have, a lot of professional athletes that are very devout will go into prisons and they do ministry. And then some of you won't remember, you're too young, but Tom Landry, the former coach.
I don't remember it.
Yeah. Tom Landry used to take Roger Staubach and all these Dallas Cowboys into prisons with him, but there are many other athletes that would go into prisons and, basically share their testimony, right? They don't do that in Angola. They're no good. These guys have testimonies, I mean, they have the real stuff. And I have to think that there's something about an addict that can relate to another addict. And there's someone serving time versus someone like you coming in and trying to tell them something that's going to be meaningful to them. That's very powerful. And we've not yet figured out how to put that in a bottle. But I think that's a key to the reform versus the kind of the stuff that you hear in Washington, which is, here's the key to reform. Get some bulldozers on the West Coast and just go straight to the East Coast and push everything into the ocean. That's what we should do. That's not what we need to do. We have a system that I think is a good system, but it has flaws. It has a lot of problems. We have sentenced too many people, but there's a lot that we're doing right, and certainly a lot that we could do so much better. And I'm glad to see that in the last couple of years we've seen some movement in the right direction. It's been small, and I know the people that were here earlier today, Right on Crime, they're very helpful in this discussion, but one of the things that gets left out of the discussion is religion. So when they talk about reform, it's like, how do we do sentencing change? How do we do this? And you won't hear the faith factor mentioned, but all the innovation is coming from the faith community. That prison entrepreneurship program wasn't a government program. I mean, that's a faith-based program. And in any of the kind of reentry programs out there that are having some effect, they tend to be faith-based. So any kind of discussion on reform will be short-sighted if it doesn't take into consideration faith-motivated volunteers and ideas. Yeah.
Interesting. I loved the piece with the man staying up convicted of murder, showing other inmates how to fix ACs. But you said something that struck me was these guys are more happy than the guys outside.
Yeah.
Do you find that certainly with guys who are about to leave prison, there's almost that ironic sadness that they have because they've developed that tight bond?
Yeah. For most guys in prison, the problem is for them, I got one problem. I'm in prison. If I can get out of prison, everything's fine. But then when they do get out, they realize everything isn't fine. The world is an unkind place, and more so than when they left. A lot of them have no families to go back to. I mean, clearly there are people who suffer because their family members locked up. There are other people who actually thrive when their family members are locked up because they've been tormented by them. Seriously, it's a sad story. I mean, you talk to parole officers because they have to approve a home placement. Sometimes they go to the home, Johnny's going to get out in 6 months. We don't want to see him. The last 3 years have been the first 3 years of rest, because he's stolen from us and everything else. So it's not like these prisoners have a wonderful life to come home to. And for many of them, especially these guys that find community like this, because I've done a ton of studies where they're not lifers. It's tough when they get out because they can't replicate that brotherhood and that accountability that they enjoyed when they were incarcerated. So that's why I went to Jacksonville recently. There is a church of former prisoners. I'm not kidding you. And so how do you become a member? Well, but all of those guys have two church homes. They have a regular church home that doesn't scratch all their itches. So they have a former convict church that resembles what they had when they were in prison together. And so I talked to many guys who've relapsed once they got out. Like, what happened? Well, I was becoming successful. I had a company car. I was doing great. And, I forgot about God and, I made a mistake. Or, life was tough and certain things went wrong and I knew where I could get a hit of cocaine. And they just spiral down that quick. So when they're in these programs, of course, they get clean, they get sober, they get in their right mind. God does a work on their heart. It's authentic, but doesn't mean there won't be these struggles. So yes, you're exactly right. When they get out, for a lot of them, it's very difficult. And for the ones that get mentors, because I did a study on that, mentors are huge. The mentors typically report being the big beneficiaries, because going in to help inmates actually help them. And their whole life, their whole worldview kind of gets rocked by doing something like that. And then they intend to keep that relationship intact once they get out. But the problem is, I'll use Houston as an example. I live in Friendswood, and I mentor a guy that's in prison. Now, when he gets out, he's not going to live in Friendswood. He's going to live in 4th Ward in the projects. So now, instead of me going to a prison to visit him, I got to go to 4th Ward. That's a problem. And I know it's a problem because when I was doing the study, I was going to 4th Ward to interview these guys at 9 o'clock at night. And I'm just wondering if I'm going to get out of there alive, or if my car will have wheels on it by the time the interview's over. And so also, someone from 4th Ward isn't comfortable going to a predominantly white suburban church. So they can't replicate what they had inside. And so that makes the mentoring relationship kind of fall apart that was started inside that was supposed to go over into the outside. Now, there are stories where that didn't happen. Really compelling stories. One story, this guy, he was a loser. I thought he was a con. He went through the program. I still thought he was a con. He made it. He got out. He did great. So I went back and interviewed him. How did this happen? I didn't think you'd stay out of jail. He said, I couldn't let him down. Not God, the mentor. He said, that guy was the father I never had. And he said, I got a job. I didn't have a driver's license. You don't even understand how bad it is. No driver's license, no transportation. If you're not on a bus line, how do you get to work? That's how bad it is for so many of them. He got a job working in a refinery, which is a good paying job. And his mentor would pick him up and take him to work every day, drive across Houston to do it. Well, one time he got called in for overtime in the middle of the night, and he thought, if I don't go in, I could get fired. But I don't want to call my mentor in the middle of the night. So he tossed and turned, and he called him. He got up in the middle of the night, picked him up, and took him in to work. And he said, that's why I couldn't go back to prison. I could not let this man down. Later on, he kind of became a Christian. But it was afterward. It was not like most of them. So that's where I think that this idea of having mentoring is really critical. But one of the things I didn't think of is that the mentors need a mentor. Because a lot of these mentors, it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. It's frustrating, it's hard work, and they needed help. And so I think in the future, when you're trying to do that kind of difficult work, it's not a bad idea to have 2-on-1 or to have support for mentors. Yes.
So you talked about this wonderful program. Why don't you think it's in more prisons in the U.S.? What do you think the big resistance to it?
The Bible college thing?
The ministry program. So
the ministry programs are not allowed because inmates cannot be pastors. They cannot have authority over other inmates. So that violates state policy. And so one of the things that I'm hoping that we can do would be to help policymakers understand that's a foolish policy. Here you are worried about a pastor having authority when all he's doing is serving, and yet you have inmate gangs and all it's about is authority. You know what I'm saying? So at some level, our policies, I wouldn't go so far as to say they're hypocritical, but honestly, they don't make sense. And so there is a hierarchy. in prisons, whether we want to admit it or not. And pedophiles are at the bottom of the hierarchy. So why wouldn't you want to have pastors and other inmates that feel called to lead a life of service to others, just like we have in the free world? And I think that is what we really need to go along with something like a Bible college. Why would you want to have a Bible college to train all these people to do counseling and then you don't let them do any of it? I could actually see how it could be counterproductive over time.
Byron, would you say that's prison policy in different states, or is that actually state law that prohibits the hierarchy?
It's policy in each of the states. They each, they copy each other, and it resulted because of what happened in the Old South, where you had inmates with shotguns on horses guarding other inmates. Yeah. And with the authorization of the prison to basically beat and kill people. So how do you do that? You pass these laws and every state adopts them, and for some reason this falls under that. And so I do think we need to think creatively about how to get around that, because I do think this whole idea of inmate-led rehabilitation, or what we're calling movements, are powerful, and they happen organically, just like what's happening with MS-13 guys.
So let me ask you a question, kind of tracking that. This happening organically. How do you see religious freedom related to that organic development?
Right. Well, a lot of faith-based groups want to be able to operate in prisons, and they do. You can't go to a prison without finding faith-based groups there. They're there. A lot more would like to be there, but there are requirements placed upon them that make it difficult. Yeah. So you have to go through training. Yeah. And now, is that bad? Not really. I mean, people do need to know about security, because the inmates will take advantage. Yeah. The first thing that you're going to ask you to do, would you just mail this letter for me? Just drop it in the post office for me. But that's all, No, once you've done that, then the inmate has a hook on you because you've broken the law. Yeah. So there will be those inmates that will try to take advantage. So people have to be trained, but there are prisons that don't want faith-based people in there. They see them as do-gooders that are going to get someone hurt. And so when I started doing studies for prison fellowship, it actually helped open doors for them. How could you go to a warden and say, look, see this, just read this. This is an empirical study published in a secular academic journal. Seems like this might be good for the prison. It saves society money and it makes it a safer person. I mean, people that work in prison, let's just say I'm an atheist and I'm a guard. Would I rather work in a prison where I'm afraid I might get my throat slit, or would I rather work in a place I think is safe? And so what we're finding is that because I interview these guys, what do you think about this program? I think it's a bunch of crock. Well, then I interview them 6 months later. What do you think about this program? I really like it. My wife likes it, because she can tell I'm not as stressed or worried as I once was coming to work every day. And so we found less prisoner on prisoner confrontations and less prisoner on staff confrontations too. So it does make the place safer. And but I think that if you don't understand religion and you don't have religion, you can see why some people might think, I don't know about this. And so faith-based groups sometimes are marginalized, and a lot of them haven't helped themselves. They go in, with their Bible under one hand, and they're going to preach the gospel. All they know. How about teaching someone to read? Yeah. And then, but what you find out is that most people that go into prison actually do just that. They teach them to read. They teach them to write. They teach them how to, develop an account that they might have someday in a bank. So they actually do these kinds of things. And I think what's happened over time is that volunteers have figured out it's a holistic approach that wins. It's not just presenting the gospel. It's a holistic approach that helps people. And so that's why I think that of the ministries or of the programs that I've seen, the faith-based stuff is the more holistic.
I would think setting the faith-based groups aside, what you've shown us in Angola is a good representation of religious freedom in practice
Yeah.
within the prison itself. So,
Yeah.
you know, we talk in RFI, we talk about that religious freedom is fundamental to human flourishing. Well,
There it
you know,
is.
I mean, why are they joyful?
Yeah.
In what sense were they finding that reality of human flourishing? You know,
Yeah.
because it was based in two things, I mean, from what I saw. So the two components of religious freedom as we explained them here are the freedom of belief, the freedom of conscience, coupled with the free exercise, to freely exercise your religion. And you said the key component was really their ability to serve.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just having the Bible college, but it was based on what they learned and what they believed in, the ability to serve. So
Yeah.
seeing, I mean, that's religious freedom in practice.
That's
Not
what.
depending on
Yeah.
the big picture.
Yeah, and you know, the warden allowed all this to happen, and he made it known. He met with the correctional officers and made it known that you will support this. If I find out that you don't support this, you will be fired. So the correctional officers got on board pretty quick. And then, again, a stroke of genius. Once a month, all the pastors have breakfast with the warden. Okay, so in a unionized state, you would never see something like this, right? No one else from the prison was allowed in there but the pastors, all serving life, and the warden. So he let us take notes. So we're sitting there, we're taking notes, and the warden is taking notes because he says, "What's going on? What needs to be fixed?" And they go, "Well, this is broken. This is not working. This is not working." They go, "Correctional Officer Jones, he does a count at 4 a.m. and wakes every inmate up at 4 a.m. to do the count in the middle of the night." And he goes, "Well, why would he do that?" And they go, "We don't know why he does it." So the warden pulls out his phone, gets that guy on the phone with the pastor sitting around and saying, "Why are you doing that?" "Well, you know, I always do that." "Don't do it again." So here are all the pastors hearing the warden chew out a correctional officer for doing something he didn't need to do. He could count the bodies without waking them all up in the middle of the night. He was just, you know, jerking the inmates around. And so he was taking notes, and he was making changes to the prison. And I'm thinking, this is an example of religious freedom. Then they would tell the warden, "Look, there's some contraband over in Unit J. Here's what's going on." And so the warden then would go in and take care of that because these guys were telling him how to run a more effective prison. This, again, could never happen. Unions would not put up with this. And I'm just thinking it's so different because you had a strong leader that was allowing this to flourish. And so my fear was when he retired, which he did 2 years ago, I thought, uh-oh, what's going to happen? But the new warden came in, hasn't changed anything. I think he figured, I'm not going to fix it, you know, if it's not broken. Yeah.
Were there any studies done on like the effect on like the staff or the correctional officers?
We did not do studies with the staff, but we observed things with the staff, and that is the staff liked it. You know, again, they're not making any money. I mean, you wouldn't believe what these people make. It's pitiful, and but I think that the staff sees these guys every day and they know when something's authentic and when it isn't. And the good news is our data actually bear it out, that there is such a thing as, we told the warden, look, quit using the term moral rehabilitation. It conjures up all kinds of negative images. Identity transformation, people will like that. They'll go with that. And, you know, they really do get a new identity. And this is all kind of biblical. But other people use that term, and we've been able to use it too. And we've really, believe it or not, had a big dent in the field of criminology with our work that we've done. And so now, at the annual meetings, our stuff is kind of front and center. And so, pretty cool.
We are most fortunate tonight to have had this opportunity with Byron. And Byron, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Good to be here.
Is religion going away in America? Do you have your calendar? 'Cause we
You've heard the nuns? I need to come back and talk about the nuns. Yeah.
35% of millennials.
Yeah, it's garbage. It's all
Yeah,
garbage.
Can't wait to hear
It's all wrong.
Well, again, thank you. And we'll have another one of these on the 23rd. I believe that's right in front of you. Another great topic, understanding religious freedom through the lens of human trafficking. And, Byron's helped us tonight to understand that religious freedom is not just about the First Amendment. It's about the rights granted to us, the inalienable rights through the First Amendment by our Creator. But we need to understand that through many different lenses. Tonight we've seen it through the lens of prison reform and the effect of faith within the prison environment. And so it's pretty exciting to have these different opportunities to understand religious freedom, both domestically and globally, through these different lenses. And so the 23rd, I invite you back for that with Laura Brandon.
Can I leave you with one last thing?
Yes, absolutely.
So I've heard this for 15 years now, after interviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of prisoners, that the next great awakening is coming, and it's coming from the prisons. Society will experience a great awakening that emerges out of the prisons. It'll be prison-led. And the first time I heard it, I thought, how ridiculous. And as I continued to hear it, I kind of thought it might be like God to do it that way, So let's leave it at that.
That's a great thought to end on. Thank you all. Stay safe.